Good morning and welcome. Happy Saturday. I am excited to see you on here. We've got about 38 people signed up to attend, but as with the weekend goes, people's plans have changed a little bit, so there may be a replay of this, but I wanted to make sure to get started on time, and several people submitted questions too. So we want to go over a lot of things today, and I definitely want to leave time at the end to get over questions and to dive in, in personal detail as people join. So let's keep this low key and conversational. I'm also just getting over being sick, so I am here in my comfies as well. I just wanted to invite you in, as one of my favorite parts of the week is just starting off slowly on the weekend, small cup of coffee here. And so I'm really glad you're able to join. If you have questions along the way, I invite you to send them in the chat. If you want to keep it private, feel free to direct message me as well. But today we're going to be covering a lot of information, and I would definitely want to make sure that we have time at the end for questions, since a few are already coming in. So let's kick it off. And again, as I was mentioning, I would love to keep this really conversational. So jump in if you have a question and send me a message either way. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share and just give you kind of a quick overview of where we're going today and some of the things we're going to cover. This is something that's come up a lot. I get questions all the time. It's a lot of women I work with, a lot of women who reach out to me and are just frustrated that suddenly things are shifting and it makes no sense. And we'll get into this later too, they're doing some kind of a diet or fast or something like that with their husband or a male coworker, and they're having these amazing results. And she's either maybe losing a couple pounds. I even have seen someone gain a pound. So we're going to talk about the role of hormones and why hormones are our friend, but we just need to kind of learn to communicate. They're the communication messengers within our body. So also, let me know if you downloaded the workbook that goes along with it. And if not, I'm going to go ahead and put that in right now so you can download it and work alongside with me and take notes as well. I'm going to put that in the chat right now. All right, so go ahead and download that if you want to follow along. And I'm going to screen share here and just kind of cover the quick overview of where we're going here when it comes to hormones and why they're so important when it comes to our satiety, when it comes to weight, and especially heading into those perimenopause years, 35 to 40 plus. So here is kind of an overview of where we're going today. I want to touch on first, one of the things that one of my clients was asking me about is, let's just go backwards a little bit and what are the hormones that matter? How do they interact with each other? And just a kind of a quick overview. So let's start there in terms of talking about the different hormones that control health. And then I'll kind of give you an overview of how they are interrelated. And I think I'm going to bust you out of your thoughts of hormones equal sex hormones. It is far beyond that. They play a role, but I would argue that they are not the most important factor. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about cortisol and adrenals and insulin and blood sugar. Those are the things when people have stubborn weight loss resistance, when women start to suddenly gain weight, especially around the belly, or just can't lose weight. These are hands down the factors at play. I would put thyroid in here because it's sort of at that intersection. A vast majority of women that I work with also have thyroid dysfunction, but that sort of comes alongside the hormone hierarchy that we're going to discuss. So let's start off by just talking about the hormones that control hunger and how we can have a say in what that looks like in terms of, it's kind of like genes, right? We can turn these things on or off based on our environment, based on what we put in our mouth, based on the thoughts in our head, based on our sleep, And that has a massive impact on cravings, fat storage, and that ability to flip that metabolic switch from sugar burning over to fat burning. So here are the 12 hormones that control weight. We'll just touch on them quickly. I can send you this after the fact if it's something that you want to revisit. But basically, as I mentioned, what are hormones? They're chemical messengers that glands and organs all over our body produce to sort of communicate to each other. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm inflamed, I'm fighting some kind of an infection, store fat, burn fat. All of these things are at play when it comes to our bodies working in a certain way. And so I think that's where we need to start paying attention to our symptoms. And instead of just trying to go harder on whatever worked in the past, whether it's just starving yourself more or working out more, I think that'll work for a little bit. And then your body is smart enough that it's going to rebel against you eventually. So the goal is sustainability and a joyful life, that it doesn't involve just torturing yourself. So estrogen is one of them, and that includes the 3 different types of estrogens. And so this plays a massive role, and I think we don't realize how important it is to our bone health, brain health, energy until it starts to go away. So it keeps our skin supple, it keeps our heart healthy. There's a reason that women don't have heart disease or Alzheimer's or osteoporosis until later in life. It keeps our follicular stimulating hormone pumping out, and that's the FSH and these sex hormones are really what fluctuate wildly during these 10 years of perimenopause. Thankfully, that's just starting to be talked about. But it directly can lead to the testosterone estrogen imbalance, cholesterol going up, belly fat getting stored, even unwanted hair growth. You might be losing a little on your head and it's popping up on your chin. Insulin. This is something we don't talk about, and I'm always shocked that I have to beg, borrow, and steal to get a doctor to order insulin most of the time. And the thing is, most women over 40 are starting to become insulin resistant. Most women with autoimmune disease are starting to become insulin resistant. In the environment we live in, with all these toxins that sort of block those glucose receptors from working, we're becoming insulin resistant. And why does that matter? Insulin is what unlocks the key to let blood sugar out of the cell and into the bloodstream. And so it's out of the bloodstream into the cell. So it's not wreaking havoc, causing inflammation, telling your body, store fat, store fat, store fat. That got your attention, right? So that is one of the things that is really critical for being able to switch that metabolic flip from sugar burning to fat burning. And if your cells have a lot of sugar, if they have been exposed to a lot of toxins or endocrine disruptors, we all have, and they start to become deaf to that signal, it's going to obstruct breakdown of fat tissue, and it's going to drive up insulin and blood sugar, and that causes tons of inflammation and worsens fat storage. So it's one of the things that is really important to know about, to know your numbers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. It also correlates directly with sleep and with adrenal function. So, and hopefully you'll see there's a few different things in here that talk about what can you do, what can you eat, what can you not eat to support these areas. The leptin, that's the one that tells you, okay, good, I'm full, I'm satiated, right? So if we have low nutrients, if we've been high stress for a long time, our bodies deplete minerals at a really high rate, and our cells are going to mistakenly think that they're starving and they're going to demand more food, right? So it's one of the things that I see in people who, what I call air hunger, where they're not actually hungry. Maybe they just had a meal, but they feel hungry, and it can be a few different things. I like to start with minerals, just laying that foundation, making sure they have the minerals that their cells need to function. And also high carb diets can over the long term can lead to leptin resistance, where your body just doesn't send you that fullness signal as much anymore. And that's a factor, especially in women over 35 to 40. We start to become a little bit more intolerant to carbohydrate. A lot of women do. And so the other thing that's really important is gut health. Now, butyrate is the reason we eat fiber and resistant starch, and that increases our sensitivity to that fullness hormone. It lowers inflammation, which is really a big factor in leptin resistance. It seals and heals leaky gut. And so things that you want to avoid are any of those boxed, canned, sugary foods that's going to just stop leptin signals from getting to your brain. Fiber is really important. Protein is really important. Exercise and sleep. Probably no surprise there. Now, ghrelin is the opposite. So if we got leptin, we've got ghrelin. Think of it like a growl, like your stomach growling. That's the hunger hormone. And it gets made in our gut as well. And it tells us to go seek food. And typically, it's going to be telling us to seek comfort foods, but we can really balance it by reducing sugar and processed food and processed carbohydrate and increasing that protein and fiber. That's especially important for us as we start to age, as we get into our 30s and 40s and beyond, because fat is more satiating. Fat is going to turn on those satiety hormones and keep them on for longer. It's really important because all of our hormones are made out of fat and cholesterol. So it's not something to fear. It's something to make sure that we've got the right kind of fats in the right quantities to keep that stable. Now, higher fat diets also kind of reduce these hunger hormones too. So it's something that we all need to kind of find our own balance of what works for us. And then keeping your gallbladder happy. If you're increasing fat, you want to make sure you can break it down, that it's not getting oxidized, that it's not giving you loose stool, and kind of going on to end up in your colon and these fat globules that feed pathogenic bacteria. So bitter foods, bitter liquids, lemon, apple cider vinegar, thankfully dark chocolate, kale, arugula. I mean, even coffee is one of the only bitter foods found in the American diet. But if you can seek those out, those things that kind of stimulate those bitter taste receptors, that is powerful for digestion, for liver health, for gallbladder function, and therefore downstream these all of our hormones. Now, cortisol and adrenals, that's something that has come up a lot, and I would definitely want to spend more time on that. But it's actually gets released by our adrenal glands that sit here on top of our kidneys anytime that there's perceived stress. Now, that can be chronic acute stress, or it can be ongoing long-term stress, usually a mix of both. And it comes down to a perception of stress. And so it can literally be anything from getting in a near-miss accident to a nasty email from a colleague to a fight with your spouse or your phone going off with an alert. It's all these things that come at us day in and day out that sort of spike that stress hormone. And that when you feel that surge of adrenaline and cortisol, it means your body is also flooding you full of blood sugar, getting you ready to fight or flight. So that's something to keep in mind when you feel that, to sort of train yourself to mitigate that by moving your body a little bit, doing some deep breathing exercises, and then just keeping your blood sugar stable. Adaptogens are really good. Omega-3 fatty acids, being hydrated, anything that's going to support your kidneys and adrenals. So that hydration, minerals, electrolytes. I'm a huge fan of just medical grade electrolytes, something like this that is just sodium, potassium, magnesium at the cellular level. It can really be powerfully strong in just regulating blood sugar and cortisol and keeping that balance in check. And then also, obviously, any kind of stress management practice and sleep is going to be really important. Neuropeptide Y drives carb cravings. I'll send this out to you afterwards so we don't have to dive into too much detail. But GLP-1s, a lot of people are very interested in that. A lot of people are paying big money to inject these. And the reality is our guts, a healthy gut creates these. And so there are ways that we can hack that and make sure that our guts are releasing these so we don't have to do the injections that essentially paralyze your gut motility and cut off gut-brain communication. I think there can be some benefits in bringing down blood sugar, getting a quick win, but we don't know the long-term ramifications yet. So I think whether you do these or you don't, it needs to be part of a larger plan. So things that you can boost GLP-1 with naturally are whey, whey protein, cottage cheese, ricotta if you tolerate dairy, but anything like vibrantly colored polyphenols, that's why it's so important to eat the rainbow. That's those antioxidants that are going to directly feed the butyrate producing bacteria that release GLP-1s. So, and then other things that stimulate it are those bitter foods again, any kind of probiotics, get those. Probiotics and bitters are just so overlooked in the American diet. And if you can get back to some fermented foods and some of those bitter foods, your body, your weight, your hormones, they will all thank you. Other things are CCK, which is produced by your gut and plays a big role with your gallbladder. You'll see some of the same things coming up. GIP, that regulates fat burning, heart function, brain health. GLPs and GIPs are part of the same family of hormones. Amylin comes alongside insulin to regulate blood sugar and therefore hormones and energy levels. That is part of the same conversation. If those aren't stable, if they're dropping low and swinging high, then your fat loss and weight loss goals are going to be in jeopardy. Your energy and brain and mental fatigue is not going to be there. Your cravings are going to be strong. Pancreatic peptide is one that tends to be low overnight while you're sleeping, and it's another satiety hormone. And then thyroid is part of the conversation too. As I mentioned, a large number of women have some level of thyroid dysfunction or subclinical thyroid issues. So it's really important to look at what's going on with your thyroid as part of the larger conversation with gut health, with adrenal health, with weight loss resistance, and with gut health. For me personally, about 15 years ago, that was one of my only symptoms that I had an autoimmune thyroid condition is the motility was just not there. And I had no other symptoms. I was a healthy, active Ironman, green smoothie drinking athlete that it didn't make sense. And so many doctors and specialists would just be like, oh, you're fine. Labs are normal. You're great. And I'm like, I'm not fine. This is not normal. I can't go weeks without going to the bathroom, even though I'm working out and drinking tons of water and eating tons of fiber. So that's just one little sign that, something is off and to dig a little deeper. So this is part of the conversation because thyroid, cortisol, and blood sugar issues often go hand in hand. How about, does anything or any of these hormones in here of particular interest to you? Anything that you feel like might be a factor in your health? Anything you want to learn a little bit more about? And also, and yes, I will send this out to you afterwards. I think the big takeaway is that there is a lot of hormones that have to interact in order to kind of keep this symphony of health and weight loss moving along smoothly. And if one of these goes off the rails, it usually drives other ones off with it. So let's go back to what we're talking about here. Now, in terms of the hormone hierarchy, I wanted to talk about just introducing you to these hormones. I don't know if you can see this, but I thought it was a good reminder on the weekend of where they all fit within the picture. Oh, good. All right. I have a couple questions coming in. So this is something where I'm doing everything that you recommended, but the bloat is back and the weight in the belly. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into this, but I wanted to touch on the hormone hierarchy. Now, this is the reason that I think on the weekends is such a good area of focus, oxytocin. It's like the overlooked hormone that is so important. It's the one that we as women, especially as busy, type A, driven, go women, we don't often take time to seek out the love hormone, hugs, laughter, nature, funny movies, right? And this, if any of these other hormones are out of check, it's like the ultimate reset button. So that's something I want to encourage you to do. And I also wanted to point out all of the things that have to do with your adrenals in terms of the hormone hierarchy. So Insulin. I have a question about getting insulin checked. Now, as I mentioned, I often have to beg doctors to get that ordered, but it's something that we can order quite easily through LabCorp. See if your doctor is open to it. The reason that we want to know fasting glucose and fasting insulin is that we can then calculate your insulin sensitivity score. Insulin is probably more important to know than fasting glucose, because that fasting glucose is just a snapshot in time. And I will tell you from experience, I have been sick this week, and I actually happen to be wearing a glucose monitor. I do that a couple times a year just to see what's going on with my body. And it has been high. And it's so interesting because my body is under this stressful situation and my blood sugar is responding. And so I think one of the things we want to see is that snapshot in time is the fasting glucose, which is good, but it can change by the day, by the minute, by the hour. Insulin is a little bit better indicator because optimal fasting insulin is 3 to 4. And oftentimes it starts to go up as sort of a precursor to insulin resistance. And that's that, I kind of think of it like insulin is the cheerleader yelling into the loudspeaker, and your blood glucose, the key isn't working, right? It's just plugging its ears. So your insulin has to get higher and higher and yell louder and louder to work. And so we can start to see that happening before you ever get into prediabetes or pretty serious insulin resistance. And so that's those two. We can calculate what's called an insulin resistance score. If you go to thebloodcode.com, there's a HOMA IR calculator. You insert those two numbers and you can get your insulin resistance score. Now, optimal is less than 1, but you can kind of see if you're trending in the wrong direction. We can start putting things in place to restore that insulin sensitivity. And I can assure you that it is possible. I have a couple of women that I'm working with right now that are doing just that. And so our bodies are capable of incredible things. So if you need help getting those ordered, I am also happy to do that. There's LabCorps all over the country. And so we can also do that at just a reduced cash price. So reach out to me if that's something that you need help ordering. The other good thing to do is actually what I'm giving away today as part of the metabolic reset gift drawing is a continuous glucose monitor. And I think this is one of the things that is so important because we can't always tell if our blood sugar is in range or out of range, or what's triggering it, what's keeping it stable. And the key to health, the key to sustainable energy, to being able to flip in between sugar burning and fat burning, that metabolic flexibility that's so critical to maintaining healthy weight, is keeping your blood sugar within a pretty stable, narrow window. And so I think there's a couple people that I'm working with that we would have had no idea if this was a factor if we weren't looking at the data in real time. And it kind of is mind-blowing to think, even if their glucose was in range, their insulin was pretty good, their A1C, that's another factor that kind of looks at a 90-day picture of your blood sugar. All of it was pretty good, but in real time, it was crazy to see. One of my clients, she was actually dropping into very low numbers overnight. And so she had been trying to lose weight and doing some intermittent fasting, and it was backfiring on her. So anytime our blood sugar, we often talk about high blood sugar, same with cortisol, but there's the other side of the coin. Kind of the other side of that is the low hypoglycemia, where with her, it was dropping into the low 50s. And that's like borderline diabetic coma. And she had no idea. And I was like, do you feel okay when you wake up in the morning? And she was like, well, I don't know. I've never really paid attention. I don't feel great, that's for sure. But I have 5 kids, so I don't have a choice. And so we've started to make some changes where sometimes we need to take a step back. So with her, it was like, let's add a little bit we need to figure out if her body responds better to pure protein, like maybe an amino acid supplement, or pure fat, like maybe a few olives or a spoonful of olive oil before bed. And that is going to help keep her stable throughout the night, therefore sleep better. therefore have more energy in the morning, but also not be insulin resistant the next day and continue on this wild ride. So those are two of the things that I think are really important to know. The other one is a woman who is reversing insulin resistance. She actually, there was one night where she's like, I'm just going to have like a little bit of gluten-free pasta tonight. I'm just going to live on the edge, right? And her blood sugar went through the roof, and she would have never known. She felt fine, but she was going to bed, and it was still like 180 or so, and it was 11 p.m. And she cracks me up. She marched downstairs and she picked up her weights, and she did like 15, a couple sets of arm reps, right? Just lifted some weights, because anytime that you are using those large muscle groups, you're pulling that blood glucose out of the bloodstream and into the muscles. That's where it needs to be to protect your body and to shift that metabolic switch. So she marched downstairs, did a couple reps, and her blood sugar just dropped. And we were both like, it was amazing. And so these are kind of the things that you wouldn't know what's going on if you weren't wearing one. So hopefully that answers your question. And let me know if you need help ordering. Thankfully, they're coming out with some continuous glucose monitors that you don't need a prescription for. I like the ones that are made for diabetes because they are the most accurate. That's what these companies do. So Freestyle Libre, I know you can get that on, the only place you can get it without a prescription is on Total Diabetes Supply that I'm aware of. But then this is one that just came out by Dexcom, and they have a direct-to-consumer one called Stelo, S-T-E-L-O. So you can actually get two for the price of the other one and just track for a couple weeks. And I don't want people to be obsessed about every little detail. It's more like, let's take 2 weeks to get some data points to see what works for your body and what doesn't, and build that into your plan, because that's a massive, massive factor with most people when it comes to weight loss resistance and storing belly fat. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I have another question that came in on the lab. So what's regular in the doctor's office may not be normal, or what's normal considered by the doctor may not be. So are there other numbers we should know about when looking at lab results? Now, the way I interpret labs is you'll see when you do any kind of lab work, the reference range. And so that is 2 standard deviations, or kind of the average of people that go in to get blood work. And I think we can probably all agree that those are not the optimally healthy people. They're not the people with that vibrant health and energy and longevity that we're looking for. Those are the people that are just like not having, maybe escaping a diagnosis. Or so we're looking at 1 standard deviation. I'm looking at a range that's like optimal health and optimal levels, as well as kind of noticing you're trending high normal here, low normal here. Let's really dial into this so that we can turn the ship around before you ever get to any kind of formal diagnosis or need for medication. So that's something that I'm always happy to take a look at. That's something that I do with all of my clients, is look at comprehensive metabolic blood panel. Can be gold when it comes to all these areas. And then of course there's very tailored functional medicine panels as well. So let's talk about, in terms of gut health, detoxification, and weight loss, one last thing on the hormones that control weight is that a lot of these, we touched on butyrate and the role of fiber and the role of certain probiotics, but we can actually see it in the stool tests that I run. Do you have enough bacterial diversity? Do you have enough gut bacteria that produce these powerhouse anti-inflammatory compounds that produce GLP-1s, that produce balanced blood sugar, and ability to detoxify toxins that come through, detoxify hormones? Because if that is stuck, then you're going to just recycle and reactivate some of these things that are going to throw off hormones, that are going to get stuck in your body, because your body is very smart. It's going to store these toxins and chemicals that you come across, these endocrine disrupting, hormone disrupting chemicals inside of your adipose. And so if you have high levels, especially if you have high levels plus a sluggish, overburdened liver and an unhappy gut, that's just going to be a vicious cycle for storing fat. And you could cut back to 700 calories and your body is going to hang on for dear life to that fat to protect its human. So we have to look at the whole picture. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about functional medicine is that instead of zooming in at one organ or one system or one symptom and chasing that, you have to look at the body as an interconnected being. We can't just focus on one area and think we're going to achieve sustainable, balanced, lasting health. And that is ultimately the goal. So a stool test can be a very good look at what's going on there and specifically for you. But let's talk about the second one. Now, if you're in your, I'm just kind of looking at the second section here. Now we're going to talk about cortisol and adrenals. So here's a question, and I want to see if any of these sound true to you. Here's some symptoms of adrenal dysfunction. So read through those and just let me know, if more than a couple kind of ring true for you, this may be a factor. And we'll kind of talk about what can we do about it, right? So adrenals, at the end of the day, what they are is, as I mentioned, they're released by your kidneys. And so they release cortisol, they release adrenaline. These stress hormones, they're really important, right? We couldn't survive more than a couple of minutes without them. And they help to establish stress tolerance. They calm inflammation. They regulate your blood sugar, body fat, potassium and sodium. So potassium and sodium, that controls blood sugar, but it also controls the fluid regulation. So if you get, swelling or edema around your ankles or things like that, that could be a factor. They influence sex drive. They're anti-aging. So don't bash cortisol. But we want it to be, again, within this regulation, right? So it's not bad. It's just levels that are too high that can be problematic or even too low. And that can be from autoimmune disease. It can be from fatigue. It can be from just ongoing chronic stress and trauma. But like I said, it keeps the inflammation down and we can't live without it. So people with Hashimoto's tend to have low cortisol as well. So you can test your adrenals through a few different ways. Like I said, even a blood sugar or just a basic metabolic blood workup can give us a little bit of insight as to what's going on with your sodium, potassium, chloride. But you can also kind of see like irritability and overwhelm. That's kind of a flagship sign of adrenal dysfunction. And that's kind of one of the best tests is just, are you snappy or short-tempered or just like overwhelmed? Or you just find other people annoying. I mean, I can always tell when my adrenals are on the fritz when I feel like something very small is just like overwhelming or demanding. Blood pressure, that's another common sign. So if your blood pressure drops too high or too low when you stand up too quickly, it's called orthostatic hypotension. And so it might mean that your adrenals are underactive actually, or that you're dehydrated. So another reason for a little electrolytes to keep the hydration status good, the mineral status good, and your blood pressure happy. Unstable temperature. So usually with hypothyroid, it's constant low body temp, but with adrenals, it might swing a little bit, just hard to like regulate your temperature. So like low unstable morning temperatures are kind of a flagship sign as well. And then craving salt. If you crave salt or eat the whole bag of chips and crave these salty foods, it can be a sign. And then obviously hormone and adrenal testing is one of the best ways that I like to do it. But I also want to make sure that you're not just collecting at one point, because cortisol it's a diurnal pattern, right? So it's going to go up, it's going to rise and fall in a pattern over time. So if you're doing a 4-point collection, you want to do it first thing in the morning, you spit in a little container, and then about an hour after waking, that should be the highest point, and then it slowly drops throughout the day, and it should be at its lowest point when you're ready to go to bed. But a lot of times when people have adrenal issues, it will kind of pop back up, and then that's that tired but wired feeling. Classic adrenal fatigue. So the other reason I like to test is that I've had a couple instances lately where we come in just assuming high cortisol, we got to knock that cortisol down. And we've found that there's no cortisol being produced. They're like on the other side of adrenal fatigue where it's gone up and then your body is just kind of like, I give up. Like, I can't do this anymore. I quit. And so that's another reason where it's important in your body. If weight loss, if we're talking about weight loss, your body is not going to lose weight until you take time to calm down your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Your nervous system needs to be regulated. So any symptoms on here that you're like, yep, that's me? Or any questions about adrenals as well? The reason that it's important within the context of weight loss, and this is a larger conversation that, in my opinion, is much, much more important than just weight. But when we're talking about weight specifically, we have over 100 times more receptors for cortisol in our abdomen than anywhere else. So when that cortisol is high and we have stress and we have insulin resistance, we're trending in those directions, it's all going to get stored right there. So if you wake up one day and you're like, I just woke up and suddenly I'm puffy, I have like a little bit of a muffin top, where did this come from? I'm very consistent with my diet and my exercise. That is a massive factor that needs to be looked into and addressed and supported in a variety of ways. And then when it comes to recovering from adrenal fatigue, I mean, that's a long path. It's something that, especially for women who are just used to pushing to the max and very successful in what they do, backing off can be one of the hardest things. And I think that's something that a lot of women come to me and are like, what else can I do? What else can I do? Harder, longer, like fasting, more exercise. And sometimes we actually have to take it a few steps back. And the same with that woman that I was telling you about who was trying to lose weight and fast, and her blood sugar was like dropping to scary low points in the night. Sometimes we need to back off a little bit, and then we can put the gas on a little bit more. We can put a little bit more pressure and a little bit more hormetic stress on our bodies. So when we're talking about recovering from adrenal fatigue, it's kind of a long road, but we just need to prioritize stress management, kind of sprinkling in little what I like to call safety signals to your body throughout the day. And that might be a little deep belly breathing, or giving your body some minerals and electrolytes. Another product that I really like is Beam Minerals, because that's a more broad spectrum mineral support. And I am convinced that more people are depleted of minerals and vitamins. And so that can be something that calms it down. And then, of course, sleep, revisiting sleep, because if you are not getting that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, you're immediately insulin resistant the next day. And that is going to spike and drop your blood sugar and your cortisol. That's like ground zero for foundational for addressing and resetting any of these things. And then just looking at where are the biggest sources of emotional and mental stress in your life. How do you find some sort of balance? How do you regulate that? How do you make sure to build in some stress management practices? Maybe for a while, maybe it's just all you can do is support yourself with some extra sleep and maybe some adaptogenic herbs, things that blunt that blood sugar stress response, or that cortisol stress response. Things that come to mind are like ashwagandha, astragalus root, maca, chamomile, ginseng, things like that. And then blood sugar dysregulation, they go hand in hand. If you can reduce some stress or even just carve out moments of self-care, and I know that can be very tough for women, but I encourage you this weekend. You're here today, and I'm so honored that you're taking this time this morning to be with me. But I hope that you'll take something with you today about how do you carve out a little moment? How do we create a little Sabbath for yourself, right? Like we need a time of rest to rejuvenate, to tap into our creativity. And then also inflammation. So we need to address, is there inflammation going on? And if so, where is it coming from? The sneakiest kind is kind of the most insidious. Isn't like, oh, I banged my elbow, I sprained my knee, it's like red and swollen. It's actually the chronic low-grade inflammation that barely is going to show up on any kind of testing that is going to get us these low-grade infections. And we can look at our white blood cells and the different branches of the white blood cells in a basic blood test as well, and just kind of see there's something going on and we need to figure out, is it coming from the gut, sinuses, the lungs? Is it coming from the teeth and the gums? Those are probably the most common, and really address that, because that's going to set off everything else when it comes to issues with blood sugar, cortisol, inflammation, and weight gain. So let's jump into any other questions about cortisol and adrenals before we dive into the final section on insulin and blood sugar. We're seeing a lot of these. And then, okay, so we'll dive into this, but one of the questions is that my labs say that I am almost pre-diabetic and I don't understand why. I'm beyond healthy. It could be from several of these factors, right? And so we need to kind of zoom out, because could my insulin not be working properly? That's something that is surprisingly common with there's a couple, my brain is going in a couple different ways. So with blood sugar, we start to become, insulin resistance is sneaky, and it can be from carbohydrates, or it can be a genetic predisposition that makes us more likely to move in that direction. And we can turn those on and off by stress, by prioritizing protein, healthy fat, and fiber first in the diet to keep it stable. And maybe we need to retrain the cells to become more sensitive to insulin again. It's something we can definitely turn around. So reach out to me and we can talk in more detail. But could my insulin not be working properly? It's a factor potentially, especially if it's autoimmune. Once you have one autoimmune disease, you're more likely to have more. And Hashimoto's and type 1 diabetes, where your insulin is too low, go hand in hand. It is a possibility, but more likely you're just starting to become a little insulin resistant. And so we need to look at all these factors from stress and toxins. Now, when I'm talking about toxins, I'm talking about not only too much sugar in your cell at one time, but I'm talking about any of the hormone disrupting chemicals, pesticides, phthalates, scented, like fake scented products. Think candles, Glade air fresheners, detergents, anything that has that fake scent is kind of like enemy number one on your cells and your hormones. And start switching to unscented or essential oils. Another one is like PFOAs, the forever chemicals. Those are found in nonstick Teflon pans. They're found in grain-fed meats, because the grains are actually loaded with these, and your body can really never get rid of them. And unfortunately, I just found out that a lot of sparkling water has them. So just can linings, certain can linings are going to have those forever chemicals, and then BPAs and plastics. So don't fall into the trap either of like BPA free. It's really just a matter of there's no research, and the little research that's done is looking like it's worse than BPA, the BPS, BPF. So just kind of shift away from plastic to whether it's aluminum or glass or ceramic or cast iron in terms of pans and water bottles, and just start to lower that burden. And that's why it's also important to make sure you're getting those cruciferous veggies and bitters and antioxidants to keep your liver happy and healthy, and getting rid of these things. So it's kind of like always this balance. Those could be a couple things. And then maybe we just look into some cyclical fasting, or carbohydrate restriction. I just don't want you to fall into the always super restrictive, because that is eventually going to backfire. And it's again the reason that a lot of women don't see the same results as men with things like hard workouts, steady state cardio, intermittent fasting, because we have much more sensitive stress hormones than men. So it's something we want to do within the hormonal cycle, and also to be conscious of the cortisol levels. So start with trying to get glucose and insulin, or you can get a continuous glucose monitor. And I am offering for everyone who attended a free root cause breakthrough call. You can book that at chatwithsara.com, SARA. And if that's something you want to spend time going over, I'm happy to dive deeper on that area. So I think in terms of blood sugar and insulin, we kind of talked about it throughout the rest of the course, because that's really insulin resistance in women. I wanted to touch on that. A lot of us start to become insulin resistant, but it's sneaky and we don't know it unless we know our numbers. And then we can start to match it up with how we're feeling and how certain foods affect us. Testing and wearables, really important. Reversing cravings and hunger. I think a lot of women blame themselves for lack of willpower when there is an emotional psychological component to food and cravings, but it is far more likely that it's something physiological going on. And when your blood sugar is high and then dropping low, your cravings are going to be fierce. When you have a gut imbalance and maybe you're not feeding enough polyphenols, enough fiber, enough protein, and healthy fats to turn those satiety hormones on, that's a factor. If you have an overgrowth of those pathogenic bacteria or candida, fungus, yeast overgrowth, it's going to demand, those little bugs are going to demand sugar and carbohydrate to feed them. And so there's a lot of factors at play. And then, as I mentioned too, insulin and blood sugar, the final point on that, what we wanted to cover today is that is the way to flip your metabolic switch, is to address several of these hormones, foremost being insulin and blood sugar, adrenals, and cortisol. And so that is the way to start to be able to easily move in and out of that metabolic flexibility state, where you can go longer without eating, go shorter without eating. You always feel stable mentally, physically, emotionally. Blood sugar, your body, you can retrain your body. So hopefully you took away a couple of key things today. And then as you're flipping through your book, I really wanted you to spend some time just thinking about one or two things that you can do, whether it's a lab test, whether it is a lifestyle thing, like bump your sleep up by 15 minutes, turn off your phone into airplane mode, right? I mean, that blocks melatonin. We'll bring this back up. You'll see melatonin on here. Now that is the most powerful antioxidant that your body makes. It's released by your brain when the sun starts to set. And if we're looking at our blue light, our phone into the night, it blocks that production. And so we're not only missing out on those anti-inflammatory compounds, but our body isn't releasing those to get us ready for sleep. And then if we don't sleep well, we are immediately insulin resistant the next day. Our brain is foggy, and we're on a cravings and blood sugar roller coaster that's just going to keep that metabolic switch flipped over into sugar burning mode, which is less stable. We have less storage for it. And if we can just easily flip back and forth, that's exactly where it's going to be for long-term, lasting, sustainable weight loss. So if you flip to the bottom, I included a couple of additional resources in there, and be sure to check those out. Be sure to book a free call with me if you want to do a deeper dive into any of these areas, any labs that you're interested in. And then I'm going to have my husband do a drawing for this today as soon as we hang up. So I will let you know who won the metabolic reset program. And then if you guys have any other questions, I had a couple that came in from people who weren't able to attend, but and I think we covered a lot of them. So Nicole was asking about fluid retention. And again, that comes down to she's having some issues with her ankles, and she works out a lot. And oftentimes that's high cortisol and aldosterone. So that's what also made by the adrenals that balances that sodium potassium pump. that keeps fluid regulation, and then that keeps blood sugar regulated. What labs do you recommend for hormones? So, okay, for sex hormones, I mean, there's a few different ones. It depends on what hormones you're talking about. So hopefully you've come over onto my side where you're not just thinking estrogen, testosterone, progesterone anymore. But for sex hormones, I like to see, especially for women over 35, where it's good to have a snapshot of where you're at, where your baseline is. So FSH, estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone are important. And then when it comes to thyroid and adrenals, I want to see that 4-point cortisol diurnal pattern and to see where you're at within that. A full thyroid panel. We want to see, and oftentimes doctors are only ordering pieces of this too, and we want to see the whole picture. So TSH gets released from the brain. We need thyroid stimulating hormone, which then converts to free T4, the storage form, and free T3, the active form used by every cell, organ, and tissue in the body. We need all three of those, plus reverse T3 and antibodies, anti-TPO and anti-thyroid globulin. Those are two that are predictive as well. Before your thyroid numbers go out of range, we can see there's autoimmune tissue destruction happening and reverse that. Inflammation markers are like CRP, homocysteine. I'd like to see a lipid panel. That tends to go up with gut issues and infections, as well as thyroid issues and blood glucose issues. And then for metabolism panel, again, we kind of talked about glucose, A1C, and insulin being really important. And then let's see. One other question just came in. So I got osteopenia diagnosis in my 30s. What do you recommend? So especially when this is happening early, but a lot of us don't know if it's happening or not. It's like one of those sneaky things where osteopenia, osteoporosis. So, but cortisol, what I do know is cortisol depletes nutrients and it depletes glutamine, leading to leaky gut. It inhibits vitamin D, which prevents calcium absorption, impedes detoxification factors, reduces secretory IgA in your gut, like your immune system in your gut. But you don't have minerals. When you have high inflammation, high stress, high cortisol, mineral depletion and inflammation, and an antitoxic burden, any combination of those. For example, if your body needs to detox something and it needs molybdenum, this mineral, it's going to break down your bone or your muscle to get to that, to get rid of it. So, and the other thing I always rule out is malabsorption, because if you're not getting the nutrients to your bones, you're probably not getting nutrients elsewhere. And oftentimes that comes from an absorption issue in the gut, which can be really helpful in looking at a stool test. And then of course, detox is a factor as well, to recycle and get rid of and bind and remove any kind of toxins that we're exposed to, as well as spent estrogens that get processed like a toxin. So, all right. So thank you. So great info. Absolutely. Thank you so much for spending time with me this morning on this Saturday. And I just really appreciate your time and your questions. And I will get the winner out to you later today, as well as the replay. And be sure to book your call if you want to do a deep dive on any of these other areas. I'm happy to answer questions and be a support and a resource. So absolutely. Well, have a great weekend.
Okay.
Good.
How do I get off? We did it. She did great. Okay. That is that. Now I'm going to put papers away.